committee together on Thursday, August 6th, 2020. The time is 6:04 p.m. In accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, Mass General Law, Chapter 38, Section 18, and the Governor's March 23, 2020 revised guidance on order by the Governor prohibiting assemblage of more than 10 people, this meeting will be conducted via remote participation. In-person attendance by members of the public is prohibited, but all effort will be made to permit public attendance of this meeting via remote access by internet, telephone, and if available via public broadcast of the meeting by Malden Access Cable Television, which is the case this evening. Public access will also be provided by posting draft minutes and/or a transcript, recording, or record of the meeting on the City of Malden website at cityofmalden.org as soon as practicable after the meeting. First, want to apologize for the slight delay. We had some technical difficulties, but again, we are moving forward with tonight's agenda, which will be a call to order, which we've already done. We will then do our Pledge of Allegiance. We'll hold a moment of silence for all those who have served our country. We'll then do a roll call to ensure that we have a quorum sufficient to meet this evening. And then we'll get in tonight's agenda, which consists of the school reopening plan for 2020-2021, a revised 2020-2021 school calendar, and then we will entertain a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of collective bargaining, and then we will return to our regular meeting for adjournment. So if there are no questions, I would ask everyone to please rise and salute our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence in honor of all those who have fought for our country and continue to do so today. Thank you. Let's have our clerk now call the roll.
Mayor Christenson,
Here.
Mr. Drummy,
Here.
Mr. Froyo, Mr. Gray,
Here.
Mr. Iovino,
Here.
Ms. Luong,
Here.
Mr. McCarthy,
Here.
Ms. Pedafora,
Here.
Mr. Weldy,
Here.
Superintendent Oteri.
Here.
All right, so we have a quorum sufficient to meet this evening. Now let's get into the agenda. Again, the first item here is the school reopening plan. And it's under my name, first at the outset, to say thank you to Lenny Iovino and Adam Weldy, who represented our committee on the reentry task force. It's also to say thank you to Superintendent Terry, Tony Mertz, our budget director, Assistant Superintendent Kelly Chase, and the rest of the district for coming together right after actually school let out in June to start thinking about what the fall would look like. So they have met several times, and I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to all of them for their efforts. So why don't we go to our superintendent first, and then we will hear from the committee members. First, Adam Weldy, followed by Lenny Iovino. So Superintendent Oteri, let's brief the committee on what's been happening and where we're going.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, school committee, and Malden school community. We began a reentry task force in May. We have a task force of 31 individuals representing our entire cabinet, the 5 members of central office administration. We had our director of public health, our school nursing director, public facilities, 2 school committee members, Captain Cronin from the police department, all of our principals, 2 Malden High School students, and we had 7 members of the Malden Education Association in various capacities, our food service director, and one of our parents is a member of the Malden CPAC. We met regularly, weekly on Tuesday afternoons, really looking at the feasibility of reentry, what that would look like. We would be briefed every week by our public health director, Chris Webb, with the latest numbers in Malden, where we were going, what phase we were in with the state, how we were doing vis-a-vis some of our neighboring communities. And what we really found was that Malden was doing a really good job. However, this virus has its own life and its own trajectory that we're seeing play out now. We also, from the state, were directed a few weeks ago to develop 3 reentry plans. One was a fully in-person plan, one was a fully remote plan, and one was a hybrid plan. We divided our task force up into those 3 categories, and we had developed a plan for each one. We worked at the central office level, and we submitted it into the Department of Education last Friday. In brief summary, the fully in-person plan is not feasible for Malden Public Schools, even going down to the state allowance of 3-foot distancing with masks. What our feasibility study proved was that with that, we could get perhaps 20 to 22 deaths, even with the 3-foot distancing, which we did not feel comfortable with. Chris Webb, our public health director, was insistent on the 6-foot, as were we. So that plan is not feasible. We looked at the hybrid plan. We fell on a model during the development of this of a on week and off week. We were looking at a cohort coming in for 4.5 days, a Monday through Thursday, and then a half a day on Friday, which would enable a deep cleaning of each school building. That would allow for collaboration of our teaching staff. And I would preface this as all this would have to have been negotiated, and we are in negotiations with the Malden Education Association going forward anyway. We also were looking at a way during that hybrid plan to enable our highest need students to come in daily. We identified them through the state guidance as students who are substantially separate special education students, our newest English learners, as well as students who were homeless or in foster care. And then the state was looking at us to prioritize during this time students who had regressed significantly. We would do the 6-foot distancing. We would have alternating days, weeks rather. We also would have an option for families who did not want to send their children in, that they could learn remotely through our virtual learning academy. And then the fully remote plan was one which we developed and submitted as well. And we would be looking at a fully remote model with an eye towards phasing in reentry when deemed safe and appropriate through various agreed upon metrics and markers through our public health officials. Again, with the fully remote plan, it is our hope that we would be able to service our substantially sub-separate special needs students in order to provide the related and required services so that we would be in compliance with state and federal regulations that go with that. And these are ongoing negotiations with the Malden Education Association. During this time, Mr. Iovino and Mr. Weldi were integral parts and members of our reentry plan. I can't thank them enough for their support and for their leadership during this. We had, I think, a very productive session very candid. And I think given the variety of opinions in the cross-section of people on the reentry plan task force, that we came up with a very sound plan that represented the synergy and perspectives of the various people on the committee.
All right, very good. Thank you, Superintendent. Now let's hear from
Just
the
to,
aforementioned.
reiterate, so we submitted our plan to the state on Friday. And we did not, one of the requirements or suggestions was that we have a recommendation, and we deferred until we made our school committee meeting. We spoke with the state, told them that we would have a decision by tomorrow.
Yep. All right, very good. Thank you, Superintendent. So now let's hear from the aforementioned Mr. Weldy, and then we'll hear from Mr. Iovino. Mr. Weldy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think I want to echo what Superintendent O'Terry said, and for the folks at home, I also really want to thank my colleagues, because each of the school committee members has also been engaged in this process throughout and paying close attention, including the chair, who has consistently reinforced that safety was our #1 priority for our students and staff moving forward. And I enjoyed working with the working group. I will say, when I went into this process, I was convinced that the idea of a hybrid model is what was the best solution. And through the process of gaining community feedback, going through all the logistics, the family survey, the community listening forums, it reinforced what I began to feel, which was that we need as a group to take a stand against any kind of unnecessary gambles. It's important for the public at home to really know that we've got answers, but we don't have enough answers. We've dealt with a consistently changing goalpost from a Department of Education that does not necessarily work with or care about us as much as we would like them to. I wish we had more state leadership that would make the process a little bit more smooth. I came in it as an educator. I want to be back in school with my kids. I know what school means to our families, to our kids, so much more than we've ever budgeted for or appreciated. There's also, for every piece of the needing the social emotional of having the kids back in school, there's also the flip side of, we don't necessarily know how damaging and how re-traumatizing it'll be for students to have the consistent, keep that mask on, don't hug them, stay 6 feet away. Those are things that kids are not used to from their educators. But there's a lot. The key here is that no matter what decision we make, it's going to negatively impact the growth and the learning momentum of some of our students, particularly our most vulnerable and our most high needs students. And we know that, and that's the hand that we've been dealt, but we have to sort of make the best of it. So on a personal level, as one member, I do believe we should be starting the year remotely, phasing in the reopening of our school buildings in a safe way, supported by science, having a strengthened distance learning program to start off the year, allowing educators and administrators time to build meaningful relationships with their families, maybe even through outdoor activities in the beginning of the year, while we continuously assess where the kids are academically, socially, emotionally. And it'll give us time to better prepare our physical plans as well. But I agree with what the superintendent said, that during this time period, I think we absolutely should be working on finding ways to get our families with our highest needs students in pre-K through 12, the highest needs special ed students who need the on-site in-person instruction. We need to figure out how to do that, while also taking into account that we've got many services that are not contractual, or they're not union bargained. The Easter seals, the different types of therapies that we should be making sure that students are able to take advantage of and have those services during this period. The spring was crisis. This isn't a crisis. We can plan for this effectively. And at the end of the day, there are just too many factors, including the lack of access to testing, that just prevent us. So I hope that this is a safe decision for our schools, for our families, and that we can consider this an opportunity to be proactive versus reactive, and make sure that our families are true partners in the process.
All right, very good. Thank you, Mr. Weldy, once again.
Thank you.
Mr. Iovino, what say you?
But what say I? It's all been said, Mr. Chairman, but I will just reiterate that our safety was our overarching goal in all of the plans that we considered. That was number one. And we built everything around that. We built everything around the science that will dictate so much of what's going to happen. I will say at the outset, the plan that we're putting forward tonight is what I consider, and I would support the remote reentry. Not a perfect plan by any stretch of the imagination, but to repeat, it was the hand that we were dealt, and we're playing it as safely as we think as possible. There were a number of people who worked extraordinarily hard, not the least of which is our superintendent, Mr. Oteri, Adam, above and beyond, Natalia Brennan, and all of our building administrators. They worked very, very hard in this process, and I want to give them a shout out and a special thank you. It is important that we bring our high needs population back as soon as possible with as much in-school on-site instruction as possible, and we built that into the plan. I support wholeheartedly 100% the plan going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Iovino. So why don't we do this first to the members? Let's see if we can get something appropriately before us. So Mr. Waldai, do you want to make the motion?
Sure, I would be happy to make a motion that the Malden School Committee endorses and adopts distance learning to begin the 2020-2021 school year.
All right,
I second.
Seconded by Mr. Iovino. So now let's take some questions from the members. I know you've all been engaged throughout, but let's see what questions you have this evening. Let's see. Let me get the grid up here. Hold on one second. Okay, any questions of the members? Let's see. Ms. Spatafora.
Thank you. So I guess I'll go first. Comments and questions, and just because we have a motion on the table for remote learning, I just have one question in regards to the draft plan that was presented to us. And it's a very minute question, I guess. When looking over 5 through 8, the start time was 8:15. However, when we're normally in session, 7th and 8th graders start at 7:45. So just curious on the time change, if that affects hours. I know that because we don't have to meet the 180 hours this year. Just maybe some clarification on that.
All right, Superintendent.
Sure. So actually, all of this is subject to negotiations and successful bargaining with the MEA. We would be looking at, so the state, and that's coming up with our calendar in the next item, reduce the required days from 180 to 170. They will also be reducing the number of hours commensurately with that. They will be giving us guidance. There will be also some guidance around what will be required hours, I believe, for remote learning as well. So we will be revisiting this during our negotiation sessions with the Malden Education Association so that it mirrors the school day as best we can.
Okay. And then in regards to the actual remote learning, you know, when we first started this on March 13th, we were kind of thrown into the deep end, and our first thought was just get kids online. Let's get kids online and make sure that they're engaged. So right now we're in the process, I'm assuming, of creating if we're going to go in this remote process, a more robust learning process. And looking over that draft plan, it looks like it with a very detailed, laid out, schedule. And again, like you said, everything is based on, negotiations, MEA, blah, blah, blah. But I'm assuming that those 10 days that are built in, we're going to really be focusing on making sure that the academics are really pushed forward and creating the most realistic in-person learning experience possible.
I think you used the correct term that I've been using, which is more robust. My expectation is that the remote plan will be more synchronous learning, which would be, real time with the teacher in front of one, combined with some asynchronous, so that there's a break from the screen time where students would be working independently. And we will be looking at developing this to the best of our capabilities. One of the challenges we had in the spring is we were thrown into it. It was crisis learning. Not all of our families had access to devices. We did a really terrific job of getting them out in 2 shifts, about 1,300 total, in addition to the 1,800 that we had out there for the high school. We just began our collection of Chromebooks today to refurbish, and we are expecting new ones to come in the next month. So we will distribute them. So the goal, the order that Natalia, Dr. Chase, and Ms. Mertz have put forth is that everybody will have a device pre-K through 12. I believe our youngest learners, pre-K, kindergarten and 1, will have touchscreen type devices because of their dexterity. We are also looking at, for families that do not have internet access, providing some hotspots. We're also working out something with Comcast that we will be putting out in the next day or 2 that will enable families to get a low-cost internet package through them. So we will be looking to do more of that will hit the ground running. Also, with the time to negotiate and get in a remote learning plan that will be more virtual learning than what we had in the spring. We would expect it to mirror a school day as much as possible, both in length of time. We would also expect that this would be attendance driven. There would be grades with this, and it will count. I think that what we did in the spring was, really because of a number of challenges in Malden and across the state, I think that there was a relatively low expectation in Bar, and that was necessary. I think, we were in crisis mode then, but we're going to have to do a lot of assessment of our students early on. That will be taken into account. We're going to have to support our students and families as best we can, socially and emotionally, in a virtual reality, and that's going to be a challenge, but we'll work these things out. And I am confident that what we will have will be a really good remote learning plan. My recommendation would be a remote learning plan. I've always been an educational leader and an educator who feels that student safety is paramount. Students don't learn if they're unsafe. I've always felt that, we've got to keep our kids physically safe in a building. The roof can't be falling on their head. We have to remove those hazards, but it has to be emotionally safe. Right now, we have a pandemic that is taking lives daily in this country and across the world, and we have to keep them safe. And I believe that the remote plan is the best option for us. I think it's the safest option, but I think developing a remote learning plan that supports our students in every way, not just to meet the minimum, but to go beyond their potential. That's what we hope it does. That's what we hope to do in a classroom, and where our expectation is that what we develop over the coming weeks will be that.
All right, Ms. Spatafora, any other questions?
No, if I can just make one quick statement before I pass it on to my colleagues. So I just want to say that I do support the remote plan, and I'll keep this very brief. About a week ago, the MEA had a rally at DESE, and something that stuck out personally for me, and also in making this decision, was one of our educators had their husband speak at that. And I don't know if I'm going to quote them correctly, but he was a former he's a military veteran in the Army. And he said, sometimes it's a soldier's job to die, but that is not expected of our educators and our children, and our students, and that really stuck with me. So for that, I'm supportive of starting our school year in remote, because that's the least we could do for those in our district. So thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Spatafora. Anybody else have questions about the plan? Ms. Luong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
First, I just want to just say thank you to my colleagues and for everybody on the task force. This was certainly not an easy job, and you've certainly been under the tightest of scrutiny from a lot of people having their opinions. And I just think you guys have done a really great job with what you've produced. I absolutely support the remote plan, 100%. I'm thrilled. John O'Terry, that Chromebooks for all, hotspots for where they're needed. That is especially from where I am in Ward 7. That's going to be huge, and it's going to be amazing to make sure, especially our homeless students, that they'll have access to an excellent education. And I also just want to reiterate, I support the plan, but I am also supporting that. And I probably sound a little bit soapboxish, but that special ed is given on day one to our most, to the best as we can for our most, to the most kids that really need it. And it can't be delayed. I saw some different slides here and there, and that's really important. I also wanted to ask a question about the high school. I noticed the high school on the remote plan was starting at 10 o'clock in the morning. I have a high school student, just curious on the reasoning for that.
All right. Let's get that question answered first, Superintendent.
Did Mr. Weldy want to make a comment first, or?
Yeah. Mr. Weldy?
Just to Ms. Luong's point, she actually, and I want to give her a little credit, she advocated for this early on, but we know one of the things, and I guess this kind of piggybacks on Ms. Spatafora's question too, about timing. I agree with Ms. Luong's point, and I think it's one of the things we hope to bring to the negotiating table when we actually hammer out what a remote day looks like. And she was, I think, pretty great at advocating from this early on.
Okay. Superintendent?
Yeah, I believe that the committee felt that in lieu of a later start time at the high school, that this would be the way they would do it. They'd start off asynchronously. That has to be negotiated. I am a proponent of personally that it should probably start when school begins or is reasonably close to that as we can get. And this will all be subject to negotiation.
Okay, Ms. Luong?
And then my other point I wanted to make is that in talking to a lot of parents and getting their opinions, one actually said to me, I hope in making your decision, you keep in mind that if it's not safe to have a school committee meeting in person, it's not safe to have my child come to school. And I'm sure she's out there laughing because she did email me that. And I just thought it was really profound because I had no plans of sending my daughter back. And I planned on choosing the remote version. So for me personally, I can't choose what I wouldn't for my own family, choose for somebody else's family. That would be my one point. And the other thing is that I hope parents understand, and I hope we do a really kind of a better job with communicating that this is a totally different plan. We were crisis management before, we're planned management now. And I think that's going to do, especially with the delivery of special ed services in the spring. We don't have to rehash that, but that was less than acceptable. And so then what's going to be the plan for these people? I know, John, you were working on that audit, so I'm excited to see that in September. So how does that come into play? And I think that people really need to understand is that we really do have everybody's best interests at heart. And I can't wait to see the results of everything that you guys have put together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Luong. And Mr. Weldy and Mr. Iovino don't know this yet, but no rest for the weary. I've asked them to get right back on this tomorrow in terms of continuing now with the planning and implementation of the plan that we choose this evening. So to me, this is, one phase here. And now the next phase, we can't take a couple weeks off or a month off. We have to get right back on it, and credit to them, because I thought they were going to say time out, I need to recharge, but they're willing to meet as soon as tomorrow with the superintendent and the rest of the team to continue on to try to deliver the best services that we can for our students and families. Any other questions about the plan? Let's go to Mr. Gray.
Not so much a question. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, panelists, for putting this together for us. Not so much a question, but more of, I didn't hear as much about if a remote plan is started for the fall. somewhere in my mind, I'm looking at what about students who may fall between the cracks? Yes, we're providing Chromebooks. Yes, we're providing hotspots. But the what if scenario is, what if you have students who don't actually do the work? Is there a consequence model or plan for that? And then I kind of shifted over in my mind to special ed and the homeless and all those other children, which we were going to make accommodations for under the hybrid model. I don't think I quite heard anything for the fully remote model for special ed and children who can't or who will have trouble in a fully remote environment. For some families, fully remote is not an option, especially with special needs. That's the only thing I just wanted to comment on. Maybe.
All right, let's hear from the superintendent and two representatives. So, Sup, you want to go first, and then we'll go to Mr. Waldai.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Gray. We will be pushing for our special needs students, the ones that are in the highest degree of need, to be serviced in person at some level, whether that be on a hybrid model, but we need to fulfill their services. Some of our students in special education need different devices, and we've worked with that. Some of them, because of their disability or their lack of dexterity, they may need more of a touch device, and we are cognizant of that. And their team that works with them will be working to make sure that their device and their technology is as compatible with their learning as we can get. In terms of, you had asked about like an accountability, what if a student isn't doing the work? We will continue to engage them just like we do here. We engage our students that often don't turn in work, so that we get some level of commitment back from them, that they show some mastery and demonstration of mastery of the curriculum and the concepts, and we will continue to do that. What we found in the spring, particularly at the high school level, was we were able to engage some of those kids in a little better manner because they had a device, they could work at their own pace, and they seemed to be able to pick up. We were able to get our kids across the finish line in a better way than we often did. Not all, but some, in a way that maybe topped the in person. So we're hopeful that we'll continue to do that. We're hoping to work with all of our staff that support our students both socially, emotionally, and academically, so that we have success out there for our students.
All right, let's go to Mr. Waldai and see if Mr. Iovino wants to add in.
I think Joe's question is right on the money and very astute. Just because here's what I'll say. In talking to a lot of the different stakeholders through this process, I think a lot about the high school kids that we spoke to and the middle school teachers, as weird as that may sound, because I think that, when we went into this crisis learning in the spring, everything was framed as optional, which is crazy, right? Because if you're a high school kid and you're thrown into this system of no structure, it's why a lot of, as a college kid, I took a nosedive my freshman year of college because you're just thrown into this independence, right? You have all this time, no one's harping on you, no one's giving you deadlines. We phrase all these things as optional. So I think framing it from the beginning as this is a class, this is your teacher, these are the expectations, hopefully will change some of the dynamics. The other piece of this really is thinking about our educators as case managers almost of their kids. And thinking about family and community engagement as a central part of what an educator is supposed to be doing. And really thinking like, if I'm a third grade teacher, and this already happens in many instances, these 25 kids, I'm gonna keep in touch with their families. I'm gonna make sure that, if a kid misses a Zoom meeting or if a kid doesn't pass in this, you're familiar enough and you have that rapport and the communication that you can make it happen. But a lot of this sort of depends on the framing. The other piece to the special ed piece, and I agree with you, Joe, and You know, Gary, you've also said this, and Lenny, you said this too from the outset, that you know, offering the services to our highest needs kids should be a priority. You know, anecdotally, I'll say when I was talking to Don Concanon and Carrie Carpenito over at the Forestdale, they have a high population of ILP students in their building, and they were saying, you know, that some of their ILP kids were actually kids who engaged the most in the remote learning, and some thrived in it. And I'm not saying that that's not, you know, we shouldn't be offering the on-site, but I think the superintendent and the special ed staff said at the one of our forums, or all three of the forums last week, that the goal is that before the school year starts, that we are going to reach out to every special ed student and every special ed family, and to sort of identify, this is what your learning plan is going to look like this year. And it's a heavy lift. And I was pleasantly surprised to have that commitment from the special ed department. And I think we as a committee just need to hold their feet to the fire and say, you know, we said we were going to do this. We got to make sure we do it, because every single special ed student who's getting services should be getting those services, and we've got to make sure that we can provide it to them. So I guess that's a silly way of saying, yes, I agree with you, but also that ownership is going to be a little bit on us to make sure that it actually happens.
Okay. Do you want to add anything, Mr. Iovino?
I think it's all been said, Mr. Chairman. It's all been said. I just reiterate what they said from the outset: safety and making sure that the special population gets the services that they need. It's paramount.
Okay. Mr. Gray, does that answer your question?
Yes, I just want to thank you, Adam. Thank you, Lenny. Thank you, John. The only reason I asked that question is because that was me. At that time in school, if I wasn't given hard guidelines, I wandered. You know, I wasn't always the greatest student. And if in a situation like this, where you take away that structure of the physical school building and you open it up even more, you know, if it was me, I'd as a kid, I'd go nuts. So I just wanted to make sure that I know it sounds bad, but our kids don't have that freedom to do the wrong thing like I did back in the 70s, when sometimes the guidelines weren't there and I wanted too much. That's all. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Anybody else? Anybody for the first time? Okay, Ms. Luong.
Quick question. Are we going to, you know, at the high school level, this, you know, being remote up front gives us an opportunity to maybe be able to reintroduce some other things to these students, maybe some time management skills, because I think being remote, and Adam and I had this conversation, being remote, here I am thinking, you know, we're all good, and I'm realizing that we need a, you know, few lessons in time management. And I'm just thinking, since we have these kids remotely, it might be a good chance to kind of really start to introduce that. I know our Learning Assistance Center with Mr. Albatessa is just an amazing resource. And my shout out to him and Mr. Francis is just amazing, and to his whole team. But there's a lot of things that they do in that class that might benefit across the whole spectrum of high school and middle school students, that it wouldn't hurt to have them sit there through a webinar. And what does time management look like? To Joe Gray's point is that, you know, we want to think that they're going to be able to manage themselves, and sometimes they just can't. It's too overwhelming.
Okay, Sue.
I think those are great things. We would be looking to do some of that. We're also looking to support our families during this remote time with some technology support, oversight, and a number of different things that we have planned and hope to bring to fruition. So yes, this has to be comprehensive. And to Mr. Gray's point, we will set the expectation. This is the new norm. I think one of the problems we had in the spring was we were out, we were hoping to come back. Then they extended it, we were hoping to come back. So there wasn't this, I think, sense of urgency from a number of perspectives. Plus, again, not everybody had access. So they did fall through. But I think once we're going to level the playing field with everybody having a Chromebook, and making sure that we have that connectivity, and then set that expectation. This is the new normal. You know, until this virus is tamed, we have a vaccine and a cure. This is probably the way we're going to be doing education for a while. When you combine that with the seasonal change and the onset of flu season, I think even if we were if we went with a hybrid to start, all of the medical and scientific experts are predicting that by mid-November we would probably have to be out because the spread would become more dangerous. So I think that with the remote plan, we're going to look at phasing in when it's safe to come back using various metrics and data that we get from the health field. But that expectation that this is what we're in. This is it for the foreseeable future. Don't look to the left or the right about, well, we might be coming back, we might not. This is how learning is going to be here in Malden for a while. So we will set that.
All right, thank you, Superintendent. Anybody else? Let me see, if I might, just from the chair, for me, this goes back to when I was a kid, when I used to complain constantly about one thing or another. And my mother would always respond by saying, you have your health. That is the most important thing. And so fast forward to today, that lesson still applies in that, we want to do everything we can to keep our students, staff, and families healthy and safe. And so when, as I outlined in our letter yesterday, I could still remember to this day when we got our first call about the COVID positive in Malden, and our thoughts immediately turned to our students, staff, and families. So I thought, a month and a half ago, that we were tracking to, being able to come back together. But I think, as anybody has seen recently, the fluctuation in positive percentages just doesn't have me, at least, comfortable, placing our school community, in that position to come back fully and in a hybrid model, because the transmission can happen, whether it's 5 days, 2 days, 1 day. To me, that's enough to, not be able to support any other plan than the one we're, considering here tonight. And, that's not just me. That comes from several Metro mayors calls that I participate in, where the medical experts have told us, because I've asked repeatedly, how can the positivity rate be X one month and then Y the next? Is it because we've adapted to the virus? Is it because it's traveled on out of New England and is settled in the southern part of the country? Or is it truly because of all the measures that have been put in place? And Dr. Walensky from Mass General Hospital unequivocally stated that 80–90% of us being able to do a better job from where we were in March and April was because of social distancing, wearing a face mask, washing our hands, etc. So I just don't see how that can happen with us all back in the various schools throughout our city. Our health department, led by Director Chris Webb, I think you were notified today. He also feels, along with his team, that we should at least begin the school year remotely until, again, we have a better sense of where we're going. And I think, as the superintendent alluded to, even if we did come back fully or in a hybrid model, what they're telling us, the chances are very good come mid-fall, we're going to be going right back out with the flu season upon us. So this is not a decision that we've taken lightly. I think, Mr. Iovino and Mr. Weldy, I think, could possibly write a book after this, because this summer has been filled with lots of trials and tribulations, because we wanted to try to get this as right as we can for our district. And again, to me, it just comes back to being better safe than sorry. I don't think any of us could live with ourselves if we said, let's roll the dice here, put everybody back, even on a limited basis, and God forbid, someone transmitted and we lost members of our community. I just I don't know if we could live with ourselves. So that's the rationale behind my decision. And, I just wanted to, share that with you publicly and to let you know there are no easy answers here. So I just do have a couple questions from the chair to our superintendent that I'm hoping, or Mr. Weldy, Mr. Iovino, if we could give some sense to our district as to whether or not this is a remote learning plan for September, October. I know we just talked about flu season, Superintendent. Does it have to be, I presume, negotiated? Or is it just we'll play it month by month? What's your thoughts and your deliberations within the task force as to what a potential timeline might be?
Potential timeline on implementing? I'm not
No,
sure.
not implementation, but when,
Will be,
when could the district be back to a hybrid plan or a full reentry? Do we have a sense of what our families will be dealing with here? Let me go to Mr. Weldy.
and Lenny and I have talked about this a couple times, and I know that our working group talked about it as well. I think it's important to reinforce from the outset that we hope that this, the plan isn't remote for the whole year. I think the challenge with dates, people are throwing around a lot of arbitrary dates that we know don't necessarily mean anything. Like we were seeing a lot of districts say, well, we're going to do this till January 1st, or we're going to do this till, and it's not scientifically based in anything. My gut feeling would be that hopefully in the next couple of weeks, the next two to 3 weeks with the negotiations process as well, we could at least hammer out something concrete for families that we're able to say, you know what, we're committing to doing this until at least November 1st or at least November 15th, so that they know ahead of time, like, if this is until November 15th, we're going to update you September 15th, October 15th, and we'll have an end in sight, we hope. But my guess would be that that's something that we would probably want to negotiate over the next week.
No question. Yeah, it's the science that's going to determine this.
Okay, you mentioned to me, Superintendent, you feel the same way, right?
Yes, I would say that, I've heard districts say we're going to be remote for the first quarter, second quarter, we're going hybrid, third quarter, we're going to increase that. I would say that we would go remote and then we'll put some dates to review. I don't think that you can put a date for a transition at this point. That's impossible to predict. I mean, if you can predict that accurately, then you've got a skill beyond anybody here, including Dr. Fauci. That would be, I think, a disservice and really sets people up with a false sense of hope. But I think that we need to look at things using agreed upon science and data metrics and set up some review times for that, because the transition, again, is not going to be, we're ending, this Friday, we're going to end remote learning and, Monday we're coming back. There's going to have to be a thoughtful and negotiated transition on that and how that looks. And, we would be working in concert with Chris Webb and the health department to make sure that that transition happens safely and smoothly too. But we would be looking at it without, I think, those arbitrary dates. That would be a real disservice. But I think we would set some dates to review and monitor, and that would, I think our task force is going to be an ongoing group. Perhaps we set a subcommittee of that task force that would review, the metrics on a regular basis, and then bring them up to the task force on a, agreed upon dates to review. That might be a plan that we would, I think, sink our teeth into.
Yeah, and Superintendent, if you can, pending the outcome of this meeting, prepare our families, to dig in your next communication, because I think you indicated to me that after this meeting, there will be a series of communications to our families about, where we're going from here. So that's one that they should prepare themselves for.
Correct. We would expect to have a communication going out in the next couple of days, announcing the decision of the school committee and where what the next communications will be around what they can expect. That's correct.
Okay. And I know Mr. Weldy, Mr. Iovino, and the rest of the school committee, because I know you've contacted me individually about this, that on the high needs population, our health department did weigh in, because I know we've talked about maybe, having one of our schools be the site. And I think he's felt that would probably not be the right move. So he's indicated that if we can work something out, we need to look at utilizing all of the schools. So, how that plays out, we'll leave to you. But I know that's something that he weighed in on once he saw, the communication that we issued, that I issued last night, that, he highly recommends that if we are able to come up with a plan, that it needs to be distributed across the district as opposed to, a single school.
Right.
So keep that in
Right.
mind.
That's correct.
Superintendent, we also, throughout the day, have received a series of questions on Instagram specifically from our student athletes, about what this means for them. And I do want to publicly thank Charlie Conifrey, Director of Athletics. He's taken all my texts and emails and has been trying to figure this out for himself in our district. But for student athletes who may be tuning in tonight, or families who might inform them, there's still talk. We have to wait from the state, but even if they weren't able to compete in the fall, there is talk, I think, of pushing some of their sports into the winter and spring and trying to find a way to hang on, right?
Sure. Let me also just allay some fears out there. If the committee does vote to go remote, the fact that the Malden School Committee decided to go remote would not prohibit our student athletes from participating in fall sports. That came out for the MIA today. I had contacted them, just because I know that sports are important. I'm the father of a student athlete who's going into his senior year. He has a fall sport that, means a lot to him. We are optimistic, guardedly, that we will have some form of a season. The MIA and Mr. Conifrey is on the board of directors. He just began his term July 1. They are thinking out of the box. I'll just put it that way. I think that they're looking at any way, scenario in which they can get our student athletes to participate in their sports. They're leaving no stone unturned. I've heard some of the discussions. I think people should feel good that they're working diligently. This has now been kicked up to the Environmental and Energy Affairs Office. Lieutenant Governor Polito is now on this task force that's working with the MIA, and they're working with renowned health experts, including Dr. Sandra Nelson from Harvard University and Mass General Hospital, and she consults to 2 of the professional sports leagues on infectious diseases, as well as a number of real high-profile people. So they're working really hard. Mr. Conifrey also has a communication coming out in the next couple of days to our student athletes of what they can do, what they can't do, and what they're working on. So he has been instrumental in this crisis from the very beginning. He has also kept student safety at the forefront. That has been critical. I think, we have not seen some of the spikes that some communities have through these so-called captain's practices, which are by MIA dictate are usually unsupervised by adults. That has not happened here in Malden. That's been really good. We've closed our weight rooms. We've closed a lot of those activities that our student athletes would have had, because it would be an opportunity for this disease to spread with their congregation of student athletes.
Okay, very good. And then just finally, I want to say to Mr. Weldy, I know we've talked repeatedly about this, the importance of communication from this point forward. I know the committee had been deliberating on different plans, but now if the school committee decides on a plan tonight, next up is communicating that. So, whether that's we designate, 1 or 2 people to be our point people to answer any and all questions that come in from the district. I'm not sure what the right answer is, but I know I've said before that we now have to be there for our families for what will be, I think, a lot of questions. I think, as you mentioned, in March and April, it was sprung upon us. So we were all in this together. But now that we've had a little time to be able to plan better, as Ms. Luong said, I think we need to set something up formally to be able to answer questions. Now, whether that's, by phone, by email, by all of it. I think the biggest thing that's going to come from the district is questions. and we need to be there to answer them in rapid fashion, I believe. So I don't know if have you talked about that on the reentry task force, Mr. Welday?
Well, just as a separate aside, I kind of want to say thank you to Ron Cochran for Ron set us up with our own Malden School Committee Zoom account, trained Jen and I on how to use it. I would thank you to the community for their tolerance with my lack of Zoom skills at our 3 forums last week, but I think we're getting the hang of it. And if it's okay with Ron, which I'm sure it will be, if we can hold on to this account, we could also, I think, plan, and we should plan to host a couple more on a regular basis of those forums, because the Superintendent O'Terry, we don't have to take your time on all of them, but I don't know how Lenny and John and actually all of the members at one point or another were there, but those were phenomenal, and we were able to hear from a lot of folks and answer a lot of direct questions. So I think you're right. I think we need to continue to communicate in as many ways as possible.
Okay, very good. Again, I'll just end by how it began, which is this is not the way we saw it, and but the numbers, they are what they are, and they don't lie. I mean, first when we saw where we were and where we are as of last night, we had to do a double take, but they are accurate, and we think it's attributed to phase 3, step 1, which I think people have started to let their guard down. That's why we brought in the COVID shows back on a weekly basis, and we're going to be doing a code red call tomorrow to the entire community, reminding them that we need to refocus and get back to where we were not too long ago, which was right around 2%. So we have our work cut out for us, but again, it just comes back to being safe rather than sorry. So with that being said, I don't see any other questions. So why don't we have the clerk call the roll?
Mr. Drummy,
Yes.
Mr. Froyo,
1 second, Madam Clerk. Mr. Froyo? You're on mute, Mr. Froyo. Mr. Froyo, you're on mute.
Can't hear you.
Yes.
Mr. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Iovino,
Yes.
Ms. Luong,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Ms. Pedafora,
Yes.
Mr. Weldy,
Yes.
Mayor Christenson.
Yes. So that carries unanimously. The next order of business is the revised 2020-2021 school calendar, which will be led by Mr. Iovino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The calendar this year is 170 days instead of the 180. That was something that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education came up with just a couple of weeks ago. And those extra 10 days are going to be used for professional development for teachers and staff. Our first day of school for teachers is set to be August the 31st, with the dates of September the 1st through the 15th as professional development days. On the 4th of September, which is a Friday, traditionally the Friday before the Labor Day weekend is always a day off from school. And of course, Labor Day, which is the 7th of September, there will be no school. So the first full day of school for grades pre-K and grades 1 through 12 will be on the 16th of September. That's a Wednesday. The 17th of September and the 18th, there will be kindergarten orientation and screening. And then, of course, Monday, the 21st of September, will be the first day of school for kindergartners. The calendar does have 5 snow days built in, and hopefully, if the weather gods are good to us, we should be out of school without any snow days on the 17th of June, 2021.
All right. right, so is that, you putting that in the form of a motion, Mr. Iovino?
I am with
Can
the,
I-
and Mr. Oteri, by the way, if I've left anything out, you need to
Sure.
correct me.
Yeah, 1 second, Superintendent, 1 second. Let me get this up on the table before us appropriately. So Mr. Iovino's making a motion. Is it seconded?
Second.
By Ms. Spatafora. Now we'll take discussion, but before we do, let's hear from our superintendent.
Sure, I just, a point of clarification here. So when the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education announced last week that they would cut the number of days from 180 to 170, our calendar, those first 10 days of professional development, our teaching staff works 184. The first 2 days typically have been PD. What we would be looking to do would to bank those 2 days. The last day of school for 170 days would be the 15th of June. We would negotiate with the MEA over the next couple of weeks to select 2 professional development days during the year. We feel that this would be really helpful, especially given the remote learning mode, to do some assessment and some PD around that. We would use those 2 days. So we would go the 170 days that the state has set forth this year. So I would just say that those 2 days, 2 professional development days, will be deployed during the school year upon successful selection of those dates with the MEA.
Very good. Let's see, any questions on the motion? Mr. Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question. Hopefully this is a really quick one. John, are snow days built into this 170 days?
Soup.
Yes.
Yes, as you see, the 5 snow days would be, this should be adjusted if we do the 170 days to the 23rd of June, would be the additional 5 snow days. We're waiting for guidance from the state if we're in remote on what snow days look like. I think that right now they're trying to just sort of get some legal framework around remote learning, but that will be something that will have to be considered as well.
Mr. Gray?
Thank you, John. That was great. It just seemed like an interesting issue. If we're 100% remote, I was just wondering, what do snow days actually mean? That's all it was.
Well, if we have some of our students in, our high needs students, I think that's where, we would be looking at, a cancellation day. That's where I think we would be. If everybody is remote, I think it becomes a moot point, to be honest with you. But I mean, if we do have some of our students in, what does that look like? We're waiting for some guidance on that.
All right, any other questions from the members? Mr. Walden.
Sorry, just really quickly to Len, you said September 16th was the first day, and then 17 and 18 were kindergarten screening?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. And again, just from the chair, this harkens back to what we were discussing on the previous agenda item, Superintendent. The need to be rock solid on our communication efforts to the district. Because again, these dates are all going to be different from what we decided in the spring, I think, or in the winter.
Correct.
So we're just going to have to be relentless in terms of trying to get the word out. I know I talked to Mr. Weldy about, maybe establishing a single point of contact, a help desk, someone just to, email, text, take calls, whatever it may be, to help us, get off to a good start here in the new school year. All right, if there are no other questions, I don't think we need a roll call here. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. That carries unanimously. The next item on the agenda is executive session for the purposes of contract negotiations. We'll entertain a motion to go into executive session.
Motion.
Motion.
Motion by Mr. Iovino, seconded by Mr. Drummy. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Drummy,
Yes.
Mr. Froyo,
Yes.
Mr. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Iovino,
Yes.
Ms. Luong,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Ms. Pettifora,
Yes.
Mr. Weldy,
Yes.
Mayor Christensen.
Yes. And for the people watching, I don't anticipate us coming back out and voting on anything. I think it's more informational this evening. So for the only reason we'll come back out is to adjourn. And then we will be back for our first scheduled meeting of the new school year, August 24th. Do I have that right? Which is a Monday night at 6 o'clock. So if you want to make that note, Monday, 6 p.m., August 24th. Obviously, we're going to leave room if we need to come back sooner, but that's the next official date. All right, so let's go into executive session. Now, Mr. Weldy, you have the means to leave this while we go into executive session?
Yep, everybody should just turn off their camera, mute their audio, and then we'll come back when we're done.
All right,
Judy, how do you mute the audio?
return to our special.
Right there, the video.
If everybody could just place their mics on mute. Do you know who that is?
Yeah, that was John.
Okay. All right, I think we have everyone. So now we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Drummy, seconded by Ms. Luong. Clerk will call the roll. I was just informed, when we're doing remote meetings, Madam Clerk, we have to roll call, I believe, everything. I was unaware of that, so let's call the roll. You're on mute, Miss.
Shirley, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Who seconded? I'm sorry.
That was Ms. Luong.
Michelle.
Okay. Mr. Drummy,
Yes.
Mr. Froyo,
Mr. Froyo?
he's on mute.
John, unhurt yourself. John, you're muted.
Yes.
Mr. Gray,
Yes.
Mr. Iovino,
Muted. Lenny, you're muted.
Mr. Iovino?
still on mute.
Mr. Iovino?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Ms. Luong,
Yes.
Mr. McCarthy,
Yes.
Ms. Pettifora,
Yes.
Mr. Waldeck,
Yes.
Mayor Christensen.
Yes. This special meeting of the school committee is hereby adjourned.
Night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good
Have a good night.
night.
Stay safe.
Amen.